always thought living on a ranch meant freedom, the kind where the biggest problem you deal with is a stubborn mule or a fence that needs fixing. I was wrong, dead wrong. The first clue that my peaceful life was about to implode came on a sunny Thursday morning. A letter slid under my door, all businesslike, stamped with the HOA logo. Now normally I toss HOA letters straight into the trash, but this one had my name written in all caps, which somehow makes it official and terrifying at the same time. "Dear homeowner," it began, in that tone that screams passive aggression, "we've noticed certain violations on your property that need to be addressed immediately." I paused, reading the words over and over. Violations? On my ranch? I glanced outside at my land. The fence was standing, the cows were minding their own business, and the grass? Sure, it was a little long, but that's ranch life, not a golf course. I shrugged and went back to my coffee, thinking, must be a mistake. But then came the line that made my blood run cold. "Failure to comply may result in fines or legal action. Karen, HOA president." Karen. The name alone conjured an image of a woman wielding clipboards like swords, her hair perfectly styled, even in a windstorm. I shivered. I'd heard rumors about her, how she'd fined a neighbor for having the wrong color mailbox and another for leaving a garden gnome outside his property line. And now me. I tried to laugh it off. "All right, Karen," I muttered to myself, "bring it on, you don't know who you're messing with." The next day I was outside fixing a gate, humming to myself when I saw her. Karen, strutting down the gravel road like she was on a runway, clipboard in hand, sunglasses reflecting the sunlight with all the smug authority she could muster. My heart sank. She was coming to my ranch. "Good morning," I called out, waving, trying to sound friendly. Big mistake, she didn't wave back. Instead, she marched up to the gate, peering at it like it was a crime scene. "You need to move this fence 3 feet back," she announced, pointing with one perfectly manicured finger. "It's encroaching on HOA property." I blinked 3 feet seriously. "Karen, this is my land, the fence isn't moving." Her eyes narrowed. "That's not what the HOA rules say, and I know the rules." She tapped her clipboard for emphasis. I laughed, a short bark of disbelief. "Lady, this is a ranch, not a suburban yard with perfect hedges and no personality. These cows don't care about your rules." She didn't smile, not even a twitch. I realized I was in the wrong movie. Karen was serious, very, very serious, and that meant trouble. Over the next few minutes, she inspected my property like I was hosting some kind of HOA, Got Talent. She measured the fence posts, squinted at my barn, and even critiqued the angle of my scarecrow's hat. Really? I thought, trying not to laugh. Meanwhile, my cows were staring at her as if to say, human madness detected. "I'll be back," she said finally, "and if these violations aren't corrected, you'll face consequences." And just like that, she disappeared down the road, clipboard swinging, leaving me standing there half amused, half panicked. I knew then that my ranch life, the freedom, the quiet, the peace, was officially under siege. Karen had arrived, and with her a storm of rules, fines, and ridiculous demands. But what she didn't know, what no one knew, was that my ranch had secrets of its own. Small ones, shocking ones that could turn the tables on even the most fearless HOA president. I looked at my fence, I looked at Karen's retreating figure, and I smiled. She's about to learn that this ranch doesn't follow HOA rules, the ranch follows me. Little did I know, that first letter was only the beginning. Karen was just the tip of the iceberg, and the real storm was about to hit. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of my dogs barking like mad. At first, I thought it was just the usual morning chaos, maybe a stray raccoon in the barn, but no, it was worse, much worse. I stepped outside, rubbing the sleep from my eyes, and there she was. Karen on my driveway, pink blazer, high heels sinking slightly into the gravel, clipboard clutched like a shield. She had that expression, half outrage, half smug satisfaction, the kind of look that screams, "I'm right and you're about to pay for it." "Good morning," I said, trying to keep my tone cheerful. Big mistake. She didn't acknowledge me, not a nod, not a blink. She marched straight up to the gate, eyes scanning every inch of my property as though she had X-ray vision for HOA violations. "You'll need to move this fence," she said, pointing at the wooden posts that had stood there for years. "It's encroaching on HOA land, and the fine for noncompliance will begin immediately." I raised an eyebrow. "Karen, this is my ranch. I built this fence. The cows live here. Literally everything behind it is mine." Her lips pressed into a tight line. "That's irrelevant. The HOA rules are clear. You'll adjust it or face consequences." I swallowed hard. She wasn't bluffing. I could feel it. And then she added almost casually, "And your barn, the angle of the roof violates HOA aesthetic guidelines." I nearly laughed out loud. The angle of my barn roof violates aesthetic guidelines. I looked at my barn. It had a lean because of that one time a raccoon tried to host a midnight party on the shingles. But Karen's expression made it clear. She considered this a war declaration. The tension thickened. My dogs continued barking at her, circling like tiny furry sentinels. Even the cows seemed to pause and stare, their big brown eyes reflecting pure judgment. I could almost hear them thinking, human madness detected. Karen didn't care. She began packing slowly along the fence line, tapping her clipboard against her palm like a metronome of doom. I expect a full correction of these violations within 30 days, she said, and I will be back to inspect. That's when I realized something important. Karen wasn't just here to write letters. She wanted to patrol my land. She wanted to assert control over every inch of it, and honestly, the idea of her traipsing across my property uninvited made my blood boil. I tried reasoning with her. Karen, this is a working ranch. The fence, the barn, the trees, they all serve a purpose. You can't regulate common sense. Her response, a single cold glare. Then she straightened, adjusted her blazer, and began taking notes. Notes on what I thought. Every move she made felt like she was cataloging my life for a future HOA novel, The Rancher Who Defied Karen. And that's when I noticed it. She wasn't just packing, she was getting dangerously close to the fence. A fence that I realized with a twinge of anticipation wasn't just any fence, my electric fence, the one I kept for cattle control and, if necessary, unwelcome visitors. I didn't panic, not yet. I just waited quietly, my heart racing with a mix of excitement and dread. Karen was walking into my territory, convinced she was untouchable. She didn't know the rules of this ranch. She didn't know what personal boundaries meant around here. Finally, she stopped, tapped her clipboard against the fence post, and muttered something under her breath about authorities and legal recourse. I could almost hear the gears turning in her mind. I am in charge. I can enforce rules. This is my victory. Little did she know, the ranch had plans of its own. Small shocks, harmless yet memorable, waited patiently behind the wooden posts. And soon, Karen would get a first-hand lesson in what happens when you try to take over a ranch with laws that don't exist in her HOA handbook. I leaned against the gate, watching her scribble notes furiously, trying to stay calm but failing miserably. I could already imagine the look on her face when she realized that not everything bends to HOA regulations. Not everything. And just like that, the peaceful morning I had anticipated vanished. Karen had arrived, and with her, the calm of my ranch was officially over. But in that moment, a strange grin crept across my face. This wasn't just a fight over fences, it was a showdown, and I was ready. The question now was, would she survive the first encounter with the ranch? I had spent the morning repairing the fence, humming to myself, completely unaware that my peaceful ranch life was about to get electrified, literally. Karen had been making regular visits ever since that first inspection, clipboard in hand, eyes scanning like a hawk. I tried to keep my distance, thinking maybe if I ignored her she'd go away. Spoiler alert, she didn't. Ignoring Karen is like ignoring a tornado. You might survive, but everything in its path gets ruined. That day she strolled onto my property again, heels crunching on the gravel. I was sipping my coffee, leaning against the gate, pretending to be nonchalant. I even waved just to test my luck. Big mistake. She ignored me completely. Her eyes were locked on the fence, her fingers twitching over her clipboard as if she could rewrite the rules by willpower alone. You know this fence still doesn't comply, she announced, her voice sharp, precise, and annoyingly confident. It's not just the placement, the height, the design, even the color is questionable. I smirked because I had a little surprise waiting for her curiosity. See, my electric fence wasn't meant for humans. It was for cattle, for the occasional wandering coyote, maybe a stray raccoon. But humans, oh, humans learned lessons too. I tried to warn her subtly, Karen, that fence isn't really friendly. She laughed, the kind of laugh that says, I don't take threats seriously. Then, with a dramatic swirl of her blazer, she stepped closer. Closer than any sensible person should. I tensed. My cows watched from a safe distance, their ears flicking, probably anticipating what was about to happen. I knew one little misstep, one accidental nudge, and Karen would get her first taste of ranch reality. And then it happened. She leaned over the fence to examine a post more closely, and zap. A tiny but undeniable jolt shot through her hand. Her scream could have woken the entire county. Not deadly, mind you, just enough to make you question your life choices. She jerked back, hair in a sudden disheveled halo, clipboard clattering to the ground. I swear I saw her heart doing somersaults. For a second I thought I might have gone too far. But then I saw the expression on her face, shock, disbelief, and dare I say it, a tiny crack in her confidence. She looked around frantically like the fence had grown teeth overnight. My dogs barked as if applauding my subtle triumph. My cows stared with judgment, as if to say, finally, some common sense in action. Karen scrambled back, muttering about legal action, HOA rules, and something that sounded suspiciously like retribution. She grabbed her clipboard, which was now bent in ways that defied physics, and stormed off the property, dragging her dignity behind her. I leaned against the fence, trying not to laugh too loudly but failing. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the first real reminder that my ranch wasn't just mine in title, it was mine in spirit. And no HOA president, no matter how determined, could bend it to her whims. The rest of the day was surreal. I kept replaying the moment in my head, her squeal, her frantic retreat, the look of pure horror. It was like a scene from a cartoon, only somehow I was the director. But here's the thing about victories like this, they're never final. Karen didn't just disappear, oh no. She returned later that week, emails flying, phone calls buzzing, neighbors whispering. She was determined to regain control, to prove that a rancher like me couldn't outsmart a rule-abiding HOA president. I could feel the storm brewing. She had the persistence of a virus and the subtlety of a bulldozer. And while I had won this round, I knew it wouldn't be the last. That night, I double-checked the fence, making sure every wire, every post, every tiny bit of ranch defense was in place. I smiled to myself. Karen had underestimated this place. She didn't realize that a ranch isn't just land, it's strategy, preparation, and occasionally electricity. As I sipped my coffee and watched the sunset paint my property gold, I knew one thing for certain: Karen was about to push too far. And when she did, the ranch would be ready. The question lingering in my mind as the wind rustled through the trees was simple and terrifying depending on who you asked: how long before Karen steps too close again? Because when she did, she wouldn't just get a warning, she'd get a lesson she wouldn't forget. And trust me, I was ready. The morning sun had barely cleared the horizon when I saw her. Of course I did. Karen, my lifelong enemy of peace and quiet, strolling up my driveway with her usual aura of authority and an air of I am invincible. I swear, she had the confidence of someone who believed she could find a tornado if it landed on her neighbor's yard. I was sipping my coffee, leaning on the gate, trying to act casual, but my heart was pounding. Today she had brought reinforcements, or at least I assumed so. There were 2 other HOA members trailing behind her, nodding like eager little apprentices, clipboard and pens in hand. I didn't even know their names, but that didn't matter. They were about to witness something unforgettable. "Good morning," I said, giving my most charming rancher smile. Big mistake. She ignored me completely as usual and started inspecting the fence. She poked, measured, muttered, and scribbled as if she were decoding the Da Vinci Code instead of examining a wooden barrier that had been standing for years. "You've made some creative modifications," Karen said, tapping her clipboard. Her tone implied that creativity was a punishable offense. "This section of the fence is not compliant with HOA standards." I raised an eyebrow. "Karen, the only thing non-compliant here is your taste. This fence keeps my cows in and your ego out." She didn't flinch. Oh no, she was immune to humor, or so she thought. Karen edged closer to the infamous electric fence. I could feel my pulse quicken. The fence had been nothing more than a precaution so far, a little hum to keep the cows from wandering, but today it would serve another purpose. A reminder, a lesson, a statement. She leaned over, clipboard practically grazing the top wire. "I'll be nodding this for my report," she said, peering suspiciously at the post. "And then it happened. Zap." Her hand jerked violently. She yelped, a sound that could have shattered glass. The other HOA members froze mid-step, eyes wide as saucers. I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing outright. Karen's expression was priceless: shock, horror, disbelief, and a hint of panic. She recoiled like a cartoon character who had just touched a live wire labeled "Do Not Touch." "Oh, that's not," she stammered, backing away, hair now a little frazzled, her blazer slightly askew. The clipboard had slipped from her hands and landed with a dramatic thud on the gravel. I swear even the cows looked impressed. Her assistants were frantically flipping through their notes, clearly trying to make sense of what just happened. Karen, maybe, perhaps," one of them started weakly, but Karen cut them off with a sharp wave. I am fine," she said, though her pale face suggested otherwise. "This is just a minor electrical anomaly, no big deal." "Yeah, sure. A minor anomaly that would go down in HOA history as the moment Karen met the ranch's first line of defense." I leaned against the gate, pretending to casually sip my coffee, though inside I was grinning from ear to ear. The thrill wasn't just in the victory, it was in seeing her realize just for a moment that this ranch didn't bend to HOA rules, schedules, or threats. It had its own rules. Karen scrambled to regain composure, picking up her clipboard, muttering about reports, inspections, and calling the authorities. But I could see the cracks. Her confidence had wavered, and once that happens, well, everything else falls into place. The rest of the morning was a blur of muttered threats, scribbled notes, and Karen cautiously tiptoeing near the fence as if it were a live rattlesnake. I decided to let her stew a little. After all, patience is part of ranch strategy. By noon, she had retreated, dragging her two assistants behind her like a parade of defeated generals. I watched her go, shaking her head furiously, muttering something about next time and legal action. I laughed quietly, savoring the tiny victory. But deep down, I knew this was far from over. Karen wouldn't quit. She had persistence that rivaled a swarm of mosquitoes in July, and with her persistence came escalation. She would return, she would try again, maybe she'd even bring more people next time. I walked back into my house, glanced at the fence, and whispered, "Bring it on, Karen, I'm ready." And at that moment, I knew one thing for certain. The next encounter wouldn't just be about a fence, it would be a full-blown showdown. And this time, Karen was stepping into a ranch she didn't understand, a ranch that had tricks she couldn't imagine, and a rancher who wasn't afraid to play dirty, all while keeping the law and humor on his side. The storm was coming, and it was coming for Karen. I thought maybe, just maybe, Karen would finally take a hint, that maybe after the electric fence incident, she'd retreat, lick her wounds, and reconsider her approach. Silly me. By the next week, my inbox was full of HOA emails, not just one or two, dozens. Subject lines screamed things like, "Immediate action required, violation notice, final warning," and the most ominous of all, "Karen demands compliance." I swear, reading her emails was like watching a horror movie in fast forward. One email in particular stood out. She'd attached photos of my barn, my fence, even my scarecrow. She circled things in red, labeled non-compliant in perfect block letters, and added notes like, "The scarecrow's hat tilts too far left, aesthetically displeasing." I nearly choked on my coffee. She really was committed to this crusade, committed and completely unhinged. I leaned back in my chair, smirked, and typed a reply that was both polite and brutally clever. "Dear Karen, thank you for your concern regarding my scarecrow's hat. I will remind it to straighten itself at dawn. Meanwhile, the cows send their regards. Sincerely, your friendly rancher." Hit send, and then I waited. As expected, Karen didn't respond politely. Instead, she escalated. She scheduled a formal HOA meeting at my property. Not just her, oh no, she wanted the whole committee there, cameras in tow, as if my ranch were a courtroom and she was the judge, jury, and executioner all in one. When they arrived, I greeted them with my usual calm rancher demeanor. "Morning, folks, coffee?" I asked, gesturing to a thermos. They declined. Of course. Nothing says intimidation like refusing caffeine while standing on someone else's property. Karen wasted no time. Clipboard in hand, she marched around, pointing at fences, barns, and even my mailbox. "This is unacceptable," she said. "We've been very patient, but compliance is non-negotiable." I nodded, listening, pretending to take her seriously. Inside, I was already plotting my next move. See, Karen had made one fatal mistake. She underestimated my ranch's creativity and stubbornness. When she tried to get closer to the fence, I casually mentioned, "By the way, that section there is sensitive, might give you a little shock if touched." Her assistants gasped, Karen's eyes narrowed, a shock on my property. I shrugged innocently, "It's for the cows, just caution, that's all." Karen hesitated, clearly weighing the legal ramifications against her personal fear of humiliation. She stepped back, muttering something about hazard liability while scribbling furiously in her notebook. Then came the highlight or lowlight, depending on how you look at it. She decided she'd rally the neighbors, sending flyers, emails, even making phone calls. She wanted to make me the example of what happens when a rancher ignores HOA rules. But I wasn't worried. I had my own strategy, subtle but effective. Every flyer she sent accidentally ended up in front of the cows and goats. Every email she sent received my cheeky replies, photos of my animals protesting with signs I made myself. Fence is perfect, Karen is dramatic. The neighbors started noticing. Some chuckled, some shook their heads, and Karen, she grew more frustrated by the day. I could see it, the slight twitch in her lip, the muttering under her breath, the way she tried to look calm while practically plotting her next move like a general planning an invasion. By the end of the week, Karen's attempts had backfired spectacularly. Instead of intimidating me, she'd become the source of entertainment. Her emails were mocked, her reports laughed at, and the neighbors started calling her the Scarecrow Inspector. But I knew better than to celebrate too early. Karen's persistence was terrifying. She wouldn't quit, she would escalate. And one day she would return to the ranch, probably armed with more rules, more cameras, and the kind of determination that makes storms seem gentle. I leaned back in my chair that evening, sipping a well-earned beer, and glanced at the fence. The sun glinted off the wires, humming quietly in the wind. Karen had tried to control me, to control the ranch, to control the very air I breathed, and yet here I was, calm, victorious, and ready. One thought ran through my mind: next time Karen comes, I'll be waiting. And this time, I wouldn't just warn her. I'd make sure she remembered why ranchers and our fences don't take kindly to intruders. It was a quiet afternoon on the ranch, the kind where the only sounds are the wind rustling the trees and the distant lowing of cows. I thought I had a moment of peace. I was wrong. I saw her coming before she even reached the driveway. Karen, pink blazer, heels on gravel, mind you, clipboard swinging like a weapon. She wasn't alone. No, she had brought the full HOA entourage this time: cameras, notebooks, and that unshakable air of "I am right and you will suffer." I set my coffee down, took a deep breath, and stepped outside. "Good afternoon, Karen," I called, trying to sound casual. My voice didn't betray the adrenaline pumping through my veins. "Back so soon?" She didn't respond. She just marched forward, eyes scanning my property, her expression like a cat trying to solve quantum physics. "This time," she said, voice sharp enough to cut wood, "you will comply with every HOA regulation, starting with the fence and the barn and everything else." I tilted my head, pretending to ponder her words. "Everything, huh? Well, I'll consider it after you've walked across the property without touching anything you shouldn't." Her assistants blinked. Karen froze for a split second, probably wondering what I meant. Then she leaned toward the fence, clipboard in hand, ignoring the tiny warning hum. "Oh, zap." Her hand jerked violently. She yelped, nearly toppling forward. The assistants gasped. I tried not to laugh outright, but it was difficult. Karen's face was priceless, a mixture of shock, panic, and indignation. This is illegal," she screamed, flailing, her clipboard dropping for the second time that week. "I will report you to the authorities." I raised my hands in mock surrender. "I'm just defending my property, Karen. The fence isn't selective. It protects everyone equally, including your sense of entitlement." She stomped back a step, muttering something about lawsuits and fines. Her assistants were frantically taking notes, probably scribbling note: "Electric fence is alive." But I didn't stop there. I had the ranch ready. Signs, subtle obstacles, a few harmless surprises, all set strategically to remind visitors who really ran the land. Cows moved to strategically block the driveway, goats wandered unpredictably, and the chickens, well, they were chaos in feathers. Karen tried to assert control, barking orders, pointing fingers, demanding documentation. I nodded politely, humored her, all while guiding her attention back toward the fence. One misstep, one overreach, and she'd be reminded again that this ranch had rules that didn't appear in any HOA manual. "Step carefully," I said casually. "Some areas are sensitive." Her face twitched, she hesitated, but stubbornness is a dangerous thing. Karen advanced again. "Oh, zap." This time she jumped back so hard she nearly tripped over a strategically placed watering trough. The assistant screamed. I finally laughed, a long, victorious laugh that echoed across the ranch. My cows raised their heads, probably impressed, maybe judging, but certainly entertained. Karen glared at me, furious, flustered, and utterly humiliated. This will not stand," she shouted. But the fire in her words had lost its bite. She was starting to realize she wasn't in charge here, not really. I leaned on the gate, trying to calm my racing heart. "Karen," I said, voice smooth, "this ranch isn't about fines, forms, or rules printed on paper. It's about boundaries. Mine, and apparently your lesson about respecting them." Her assistants were scribbling furiously, probably preparing a report for some HOA tribunal that would never, ever understand what happened. Karen stomped away, muttering threats, dragging her entourage like a defeated parade. The air smelled of hay, dust, and sweet, sweet victory. I watched her retreat, knowing she would regroup. Of course she would. But I also knew this. The fence, the cows, the goats, the signs, everything was ready. Karen had underestimated the ranch, underestimated me, and underestimated the lessons an electric fence could teach. I sighed, leaning against the gate. Today was a win, but the war wasn't over. Karen was persistent, stubborn, and dangerously creative, but she didn't know one thing: I had patience, preparation, and a few tricks left up my sleeve. And when she came back, the ranch would be waiting. It was one of those mornings where the ranch felt alive, sun glinting on the fence wires, the cows lazily grazing, and the wind whispering through the trees like it was in on a secret. And yes, I knew exactly what secret. Karen was coming back. I didn't need a crystal ball. Persistent people like her always return, especially when they think they've been humiliated but not defeated. And sure enough, I heard it. The crunch of gravel, the heels, the clipboard rattling. Karen, the unstoppable storm of pink blazer and paperwork. She arrived earlier than usual, sprinting almost like a general desperate to reclaim her honor. She wasn't alone either. No, this time she had brought reinforcements. 3 more HOA members armed with cameras, notebooks, and expressions that said, "We're ready for battle." I had to suppress a laugh. Little did they know the real battle wasn't about rules, it was about survival on the ranch. Karen wasted no time. "I'm inspecting every violation personally," she announced, striding up like she owned the land. "This is your final warning, compliance is mandatory." I nodded politely, hiding my grin. "Of course, Karen, please inspect away." Her gaze fell on the fence and I swear time slowed. She walked toward it, clipboard poised. I could see the familiar twitch in her lip, the narrowed eyes, the tiny moment of doubt. She didn't know what awaited her. "Oh, zap." Her scream pierced the quiet ranch. I almost fell off my chair laughing. The assistants gasped, some even shrieked. Karen's expression was unforgettable, equal parts horror, rage, and humiliation. She jumped back, nearly tripping over the goat that had wandered into the path, a goat who, I realized with amusement, had become an unofficial accomplice in this ranch defense strategy. But Karen wasn't finished, not by a long shot. If anything, the shock fueled her determination. She pointed at the fence again. "This is harassment," she yelled, flailing, trying to regain authority. I shrugged, innocent as a puppy. "Just maintaining property safety, Karen, for everyone's benefit." She turned to the assistants, furiously scribbling notes. "Document this, this is outrageous," she shouted. Meanwhile, my cows leaned over the fence, chewing cud like bored spectators at a circus. Even the chickens seemed to cluck in agreement with the chaos. Karen decided she needed to escalate. "I'm calling the authorities," she screamed, dragging out her phone. But before she could hit dial, she stepped toward the fence again, just a little too close. "Oh, zap." Her yelp this time was deafening, bouncing across the ranch like a cannon shot. She flailed, stumbled, and accidentally toppled over a pile of hay bales I had set up strategically earlier in the week. The assistants scrambled to catch her, papers flying everywhere. Cameras tumbled. One unlucky HOA member ended up with a face full of hay. I laughed so hard I nearly choked. Karen, pink blazer rumpled, hair wild, muttering something about lawsuits and ranch terrorism, looked at me like I had personally offended every HOA rule ever written, and she had. By the time she finally scrambled back to her car, dragging the assistants behind her, I realized the magnitude of what had just happened. The entire neighborhood had witnessed a first. The unstoppable Karen, humbled by an electric fence, a few clever animals, and a rancher who refused to be intimidated. I leaned on the gate, sipping my coffee, grinning. This wasn't just a win, it was a statement. Karen wasn't going to storm my ranch again anytime soon, at least not without planning for humiliation, inconvenience, and at least one goat running wild. And the best part, the story was spreading. Neighbors whispered, snickered, and some even started coming over to watch the Karen show. I never invited them, the ranch was mine, but the legend of her humiliation was growing faster than weeds in July. I knew Karen would try again. She's persistent, stubborn, and incapable of admitting defeat. But now she had a reputation. The HOA might support her in theory, but the ranch had its own rules. Practical, cunning, and occasionally electrifying. That evening, as the sun set and the ranch finally returned to calm, I walked along the fence, patting the posts. The cows wandered alongside me, peaceful once again. I knew the war wasn't over entirely, but Karen had been humbled. And there's something satisfying about seeing a self-righteous HOA president realize, for the first time, that not everything bends to paperwork, authority, or ego. Some things, like a ranch and the people who run it, are untouchable. The storm had passed for now. The legend of the electric fence would live on, and I smiled, knowing that when Karen inevitably returned, she'd remember today and dread it. Because some lessons, once learned, never leave. The morning after Karen's spectacular humiliation, the ranch felt almost sacred. Quiet, sun-dappled, and peaceful, the kind of morning where you think, finally, victory is yours. But I knew better. Karen had pride, persistence, and a remarkable ability to survive her own embarrassment. She might regroup, scheme, and attempt to reclaim her authority. But today, at least, she was gone. I walked the fence line, checking posts and wires, humming to myself. The cows grazed lazily, the goats wandered strategically, and even the chickens seemed to strut a little more confidently, like proud witnesses to the legend of the electric fence. Every inch of my property bore the scars of the battle, but in a good way. This was my land, and every spark, every strategic obstacle, every prank-ready hay bale had made it clear. The ranch wasn't just mine in name, it was mine in spirit. By mid-morning, neighbors began appearing, one by one, drawn by whispers of Karen's latest fiasco. Some chuckled, some shook their heads, and a few even brought coffee as if they were attending a show rather than visiting a ranch. "I heard about the fence incident," one neighbor said, smirking. "Did Karen survive?" I shrugged innocently, gesturing toward the peaceful animals. "She learned her lesson, the ranch has its own rules." They laughed, and I knew the legend was already growing. Word of Karen's electric misadventures spread like wildfire, and I could almost hear the collective sigh of relief from the neighborhood. Finally, they saw what I already knew. Not everything bends to HOA rules, and sometimes common sense and a little electricity is all it takes to set things right. Later that afternoon, I was repairing a post near the barn when I saw something that made me grin. Karen's minions, the HOA assistants, tiptoeing onto the property, trying to look professional but clearly terrified. They were taking notes, whispering to each other, probably debating whether they should quit their jobs and take up something safer like underwater basket weaving. "Hello there," I called cheerfully, enjoying the view. They jumped, eyes wide. Yes, very informative," one stammered. I nodded, good, because that's how the ranch works. Informative, a little shocking if you get too close, and utterly unbending to nonsense. They didn't argue, they walked away carefully, like cats that had just learned not to trust the shiny red laser pointer. I chuckled. Karen's influence had officially waned. Her reign of terror over my property was over for now. That evening, I leaned against the fence, watching the sunset paint gold and crimson across the ranch. The cows were calm, the goats were in their usual mischief, and the chickens clucked peacefully. Everything was as it should be, and for the first time in weeks, I felt complete peace. I thought back to the first letter, the first inspection, the countless emails, and Karen's increasingly desperate attempts to assert control. Each encounter had tested my patience, my creativity, and my sense of humor, but through it all, I had stayed true to one rule: this ranch answers to no one but me. And it had been fun, mostly. I had to admit, watching a self-righteous HOA president squeal in shock while learning the limits of her authority was oddly satisfying. There's a strange joy in teaching lessons the hard way, especially when the student is so ridiculously certain they're always right. By the time night fell, the ranch was bathed in a silver glow under the moon. The electric fence hummed quietly, a loyal guardian. The cows settled, the goats napped, and even the chickens had tucked themselves in. I walked through the fields, patting posts, humming a little tune of victory. Karen might come back someday, but I would be ready. And if she did, well, let's just say the fence would still have a few surprises in store. For now, though, peace reigned. The HOA had been shown in the most electrifying way possible that the ranch follows its own rules. And me? I had my land, my animals, and the satisfaction of knowing that no amount of clipboards, fines, or self-importance could ever change that. I smiled, watching the stars appear over the horizon. The ranch was mine, the animals were safe, and the legend of Karen versus the electric fence would be told for years to come. Neighbors would whisper, kids would giggle, and the cows, well, they would continue to graze, blissfully unaware of how much drama they had inspired. I took a deep breath, leaning against the fence one last time that night. Victory, I realized, isn't just about winning. It's about defending what's yours, standing your ground, and occasionally letting a little electricity do the talking. And with that, the ranch settled into quiet glory. Karen had learned her lesson, the neighborhood had witnessed the spectacle, and I had the last laugh and a perfectly intact fence. The ranch had won, and it felt amazing. Every HOA has a story on HOA Headaches. You'll hear the ones they tried to bury. Subscribe today.